I have always valued my work because I knew it was genuine. But my brother Daniel didn't understand that, and one day, he humiliated me in front of his friends by saying I would always be poor. That evening, I decided to cut him out of my life forever, to give him the chance to experience all the consequences of his words and choices. When we were kids, Daniel and I were inseparable. Everything we had, we shared: toys, jokes, dreams for the future. I was calm and stubborn, while he was vibrant, fearless, and determined. If someone had told me back then that we would one day end up here, with a rift in our relationship and nearly no communication, I wouldn't have believed it. But over time, I began to notice small cracks in our relationship. I brushed them off, thinking they were just minor things, some biting comments, hints. I didn't see that it wasn't just words, but the beginning of a big problem. And then, one evening at a family dinner, everything changed. I run a small gardening business. It's not a big deal, but it's mine. I started it 5 years ago after leaving a job at a company that drained all my energy. It's hard work, but I love what I do. Every garden I turn into something beautiful and green brings me satisfaction. It's not glamorous, but I'm proud because I'm creating something real. Daniel, on the other hand, chose a completely different path. He was always the one to talk about his high-paying job in finance, his luxurious home, and travels. And although I never envied his life, over time I began to realize that he didn't respect mine. And so, at Mom's dinner, everything came out. It was one of those rare evenings when the whole family gathered together. Me, Daniel, our mom Ludmilla, and a few of Daniel's friends. He invited his acquaintances, which wasn't surprising. They were the kind of people who wear shoes without socks and talk about synergy without irony. I didn't quite fit in with their company, but I didn't want to cause any problems. It started with little things. When Daniel introduced me to his friends, he smiled and said, "Here's my brother Sergey. He's more of a physical labor kind of guy." Everyone laughed, but I just smiled in response. However, that was only the beginning. Soon, Daniel started making more and more unfriendly remarks. During one of the breaks between conversations, he loudly asked, "Sergey, how's your business?" "Still working and hardly making anything." His friends laughed, and one of them added, "Oh, I couldn't work like that. My back wouldn't take it." I tried not to pay attention, replying that everything was going well since I'd signed a big contract. But Daniel didn't stop. "Oh, really? What's it now? Another contract for some suburban lots? Or are you finally taking on something serious?" He smiled, and everyone laughed again. My heart started beating faster, but I just responded, "It's a redesign of a corporate campus." I thought that would calm the situation down, but Daniel didn't stop. "Well, I hope they pay you on time. Small businesses always have financial problems," he said with mockery. I felt my stomach tighten with anger, but I just gritted my teeth and stayed silent. And then, when dessert was brought to the table, Daniel decided to tell another story about me. "You know," he began, "Sergey once said he would be a millionaire by 30. I flinched. It was one of those childhood jokes I had long forgotten. Daniel remembered it well. "Well, life had other plans," he continued, laughing. And his friends burst out laughing again. I couldn't listen to it anymore. "You know, sometimes there's someone in the family who will always stay poor," he added with a smile. "There's nothing shameful about it, Sergey. Someone has to balance things out, right?" Then I felt my face burn with shame. I felt defenseless, worthless. A few minutes later, I stood up, quickly apologized, and said I had to leave. I didn't even say goodbye to Mom, just walked out and got into my car. The whole way home, I tried to figure out if this had always been Daniel. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it before. But now, I was ready to make an important decision. From that evening on, I cut him out of my life. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic fights, just silence. I stopped answering his calls, stopped writing to him, and didn't show up at meetings where I knew he would be. And you know what? At first, I thought he wouldn't even care because Daniel was always surrounded by people. But he noticed. He noticed very quickly. The first week, Daniel sent me a few text messages. "Are you okay? Haven't heard from you in a couple of days. Is this about that dinner?" I decided to ignore them. I thought he would quickly get tired and stop texting. But he didn't stop. Instead of calming down, his messages became more aggressive. "So is this it? You're upset over a joke, and now you want to be all closed off." I could feel my patience running thin, but I kept ignoring him. By the third week, the text got worse. "Oh, this is how you're going to act? Are you seriously upset over something so petty? No matter how hard I try, you still choose to be selfish." His words were full of insults and accusations. At the same time, something strange started happening in my life. I focused on work more than ever, and my efforts began to pay off. I signed several new contracts and received one of the biggest orders of my career. And when I finished the project, the client sent me not only a written thank you, but also a bonus check. With that money, I was able to buy a new car, the one Daniel had recently laughed at, saying I would never be able to afford. As I sat behind the wheel, the thought of sending him a photo to show him how I had changed my life almost overwhelmed me. But then I realized I had no desire to do that. He no longer mattered to me. And then one day, I got a call from Mom. "Sergey, you need to talk to Daniel," she said, her voice filled with sadness. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew where this was going. "He's having money problems, but doesn't want to admit it. He's in a lot of debt and can't pay for rent. I can see he's really stressed." I was standing in the kitchen when she said that, feeling my fingers clench in tension. Daniel, the one who was always on top, the one who mocked my business, now found himself in this situation. At first, I felt a small sense of satisfaction, but I quickly realized that I found it hard to feel sympathy for him. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Maybe you could help him?" "You're doing well now," she replied. I had heard this before. "He's your brother, Sergey. We have to help each other." I was ready to understand that, but I couldn't do it. "I'm not giving him money, Mom. He never respected me or my work. Why should I help him when he always mocked me?" There was no answer, and I ended the conversation before she could convince me to change my mind. But that wasn't the end of this story. A few days after that conversation, Daniel showed up at my office without warning. I was in a meeting with a client when my assistant said that some man wanted to see me and claimed to be my brother. My heart dropped. I told him to wait and quickly finished the meeting. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, Daniel burst into my office. "Sergey, we need to talk," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the office to hear. I was stunned. "What are you doing here?" I barely managed to ask, leading him into the hallway. He looked nothing like the Daniel I knew. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and there was no usual self-assurance on his face. "Are you seriously going to ignore me when everything is going wrong for me?" he asked, his face red with anxiety. "You've always been fine. You don't understand anything." I tried to stay calm, even as he started raising his voice. "Daniel, what are you doing here? I'm not your financial advisor, and you can't just show up in my office whenever you want." He didn't stop. "Yeah, you're so smart with your little company, but that's not what gives you the right to be so proud. You won't understand how hard things are for me right now." I felt my tolerance begin to reach its limit, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Don't think I don't understand, Daniel. I've understood your game for a long time. You've always been the one who belittled my work, laughed at what I do, and now, when your world is falling apart, you think I should come to your rescue." He stayed silent for a few seconds, then turned and looked at me as if trying to gauge what exactly I was feeling. I knew he was waiting for my help, as he always did, but I had no intention of being his savior. "I'm sorry, Daniel, but I'm not going to help you," I said firmly. "You made this choice, and now you have to live with it." He didn't respond. He just silently looked at me, and I saw the disappointment and even fear reflected on his face. I had never seen him so helpless, and somehow it made my heart flinch for a moment. But I couldn't change my decision. "If you're trying to make me feel guilty, it won't work," I continued. "I've understood long ago that I'll never be your scapegoat. I won't justify your mistakes." Daniel took his eyes off me, as if thinking about what to do next. Then he turned and walked away without saying a word. I stood there in the hallway, watching him leave my office building. After that, I felt an inexplicable emptiness inside. I had no illusions about what could have been between us, but the bitterness of everything we once shared being lost still lingered. In the following weeks, I didn't hear from him anymore, and it was a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I kept working, signing new clients, rebuilding my business, and feeling better. I saw my business was growing and how much effort I had put into its development. Every success, every new contract, it was my achievement, and I no longer allowed Daniel to take any of that joy away. But then a few months later, I got a phone call from one of his friends who had once mocked my business. I recognized Stanislav's voice. "Hi, Sergey, it's Stanislav. I heard you're not talking to Daniel. I just wanted to say that he's not doing well right now." I already suspected where this conversation was going, but I decided to listen. "He's in a lot of debt, Sergey, and he's going through a tough time. He's trying to hide it, but his situation is getting worse. I just thought you should know." I stood there listening to this, and inside I felt that same feeling, some pity, but mostly indifference. "I know," I replied, "but it's not my problem." Stanislav was quiet for a few seconds. "I understand, Sergey, but you're still his brother. He probably just can't tell you himself. It's really hard for him." I sighed heavily and thanked him for the call. I understand, Stanislav. It's fine. I hung up and returned to my work, but I felt confused. Something inside me stirred when I thought that this might be Daniel's last chance to turn things around. And although I didn't feel complete disdain for him, I wasn't ready to help, no matter how much he tried to manipulate my emotions. A few days later, I received a new message, and it was from Daniel. All his previous attempts at texting had seemed to grow more rude and aggressive. But this time, he wrote a simple, short sentence. I need to talk. Can we meet? I didn't respond immediately. The feeling I experienced was deeper than just a desire to figure out what had happened. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a hint of sincerity in his words. But I wasn't ready to forgive all those years when he mocked my ambitions and my achievements. And even if he truly needed help now, could he change his attitude toward me? I sat in silence, contemplating his message. I was overwhelmed with different emotions, and I couldn't just brush it off. I knew that, in the end, this moment was exactly what I had been waiting for all my life. An opportunity for Daniel to understand that I am not his bank or savior, but just a person who deserves respect. I wasn't ready to abandon all my principles just to save him, even if he asked for it. But something inside me told me that this was also the last chance to see if he had changed. And that mattered to me, because I didn't want to leave this rift between us without definitive answers. I gathered myself and headed to the cafe near my work, the one we used to visit often. It brought back many memories of times when we were still close. And when I saw him sitting at a table, it looked like he had been waiting for a long time. He seemed much less confident than I remembered. His clothes weren't neatly arranged. His hair wasn't as perfect as usual. This was a different Daniel, and I couldn't help but notice how tired and worn his eyes looked. He seemed as though the weight of the world had fallen onto his shoulders. "Hello," he said quietly as I approached. It seemed like he was trying to appear calm, but something in his voice sounded unnatural. I sat at the table, looking at him. It felt like there was a whole sea of unspoken words and misunderstood emotions between us. I decided not to make the first move. The time had come. He went silent for a few minutes, playing with a cup in front of him. I didn't rush, waiting for him to start the conversation. He sighed and finally said, "I probably deserve for you to ignore me. I disrespected your work, your efforts, and now, when my life is falling apart, I realize I was a fool." These words weren't new to me. I had always known that he understood, but for some reason, I ignored it. So I calmly replied, "Yes, you were a fool, and I've told you that many times. You disrespected what I did, but now, when your life has changed, you want me to support you. But I can't, Daniel. I can't be the one to clean up your mistakes anymore." He looked at me with such an expression, as if I had just said something that broke his heart. His eyes were full of regret and self-blame. And yet, I could feel that he was trying to understand why I couldn't save him. "I understand," he replied quietly. "I probably deserve everything that has happened to me. But, Sergey, I'm not asking you to solve my problems. I just wanted to say that I regret what I did. I was stubborn and self-confident, and now I have to pay the price." I took a deep breath, trying to find the strength to respond in a way that wouldn't turn this into another empty conversation. "It's not about apologies, Daniel. You always thought you could get away with everything, while I worked and did what I had to. You can't just say you regret it and expect everything to change. It takes more than just words." He fell silent, looking at me with sad eyes. I felt a distance finally emerging between us, even though we were still sitting at the same table. It wasn't about apologies. It was about whether we could each move forward, each on our own path. "I understand everything," he said again, and this time his voice was calmer. "It's hard to accept, but I won't try to change your decision anymore. I have to learn to live with what I've done." I smiled slightly, not even knowing if it was a smile of encouragement or just a sign of relief. "Maybe, someday, we can rebuild our relationship when we're both ready. But it won't happen quickly. I can't just forget everything that happened between us." We didn't say anything more. It was just a simple meeting, and maybe it was the last chance for both of us to stop and realize that change in life is possible, but it doesn't come without a cost. That day, I headed home, thinking about all the years that had passed between us and about how important it sometimes is to make decisions that can change your life. I no longer search for answers to questions that couldn't be changed. Maybe, in the future, we would find a way back to each other. But for now, it was a step towards both of us finally becoming independent from what had kept us together.